We have been closely following updates from the Northeast as rumors and theories about an alleged serial killer in New England continue to swirl online. Well, I'll tell you what, I had a chance to sit down with a former FBI profiler and serial killer expert, Candice DeLong, to get her take on the investigation. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Right now, at least 11 people have been found dead in the New England area over the past several months. That's according to reporting from Boston.com, although, of course, there are questions about whether they're all connected and whether that number should be the number that it is. But there are serious questions right now about could there be a serial killer stalking states like Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts. And these questions and these rumors and these theories are starting to ramp up. And it seems the more police departments try to debunk the serial killer theory, some online sleuths are latching onto it as the only possible explanation. Police and prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions say there's no evidence that there's any connections between any of the cases. In fact, several sets of remains have not yet been identified, and it's unclear if there was any foul play at all in all these deaths. Other investigations have turned up answers that point away from a serial killer. For example, police in Groton, Connecticut say they solved the murder of a woman dismembered and stuffed into a suitcase. 58-year-old Suzanne Wormser's remains were found on March 19th near a cemetery. Investigators say they were able to connect the death back to a man named Donald Kofel, who'd been living with Wormser. He reportedly told police that he killed her over $200 worth of missing crack cocaine. Faces charges of murder, tampering with evidence, improper disposal of a body. But some of the most recent cases have been uncovered in just the last few days. April 22nd, a woman was found dead near a Springfield, Massachusetts bike path. Police identified her as 45-year-old Megan Meredith. While her death is being investigated as a homicide, police say they believe this is an isolated incident. A woman whose remains were found along the bank of the Connecticut River in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, April 27, identified this week as 72-year-old Mary Colasanto. She'd been reported missing back in March. Rocky Hill police told the Stamford Advocate that a boater had notified officials about the discovery when they spotted her remains near the shoreline. Now, we have done a couple of episodes on this topic, doing deep dives into what has been discovered over the last few months. You can check them all out on Law&Crime's YouTube channel. But the number of ongoing investigations and maybe lack of answers, it is pushing people toward videos and social media groups that are dedicated to a so-called New England serial killer. Some of the Facebook discussion boards have thousands of members. And while focusing a lot of attention on these cases could lead to credible tips and leads for sure, unfortunately, we live in a day and age where it could lead up to misinformation and pranks. And things really reached a fever pitch when an anonymous post in a Facebook group, originally named New England Serial Killer, claimed that bodies were buried at Scarborough Beach in Narragansett, Rhode Island, and that sparked police efforts to search the area with cadaver dogs. The thing about that is I spoke with Sergeant Brent Kuzman of the Narragansett Police about what happened next.
Over the Easter weekend on the 19th, we were contacted by multiple people via email, phone call, Facebook on its messenger. We were advised of some ominous posts in this New England serial killer Facebook group and their sister Facebook group. They were all anonymous, and they were definitely eerie, almost poetic-like, and they alluded to bodies being buried at the northern part of Scarborough Beach, which is known as Black Point. There are ruins of a carriage house from the Gilded Age there, known as the Windswept Ruins. And there are alleged to be 6 bodies buried vertically facing the water, and it was definitely ominous. It was worrisome for multiple people. Dozens contacted us over the weekend. So on Monday, when our unit came in, we hit the ground running. We contacted the administrator of the Facebook post. We received screenshots of every post, some of which were deleted at the time, but she already had screenshots. And we began to kind of piece it together, read it over, and see really what we were dealing with here. As you know, anonymous Facebook posts are never really anonymous. The group admin could see the name of who posted it, and it appeared to be more of a basic account with no personal information, what some refer to as a troll account or a burner account. And in the comment section of some of these posts and other people's posts, he basically told them we were, there's no crime explicitly stated. I'm being metaphorical. I'm a storyteller. He alluded to working on a novel, but the people in the group would not have known that because it was an anonymous original post. So Monday we hit the ground running. We did a quick search of the area that day. It is a large area with there being beach, trails, and woods. So we felt it would be best to get cadaver dogs to search the area as well. So we coordinated with the Rhode Island State Police for a Wednesday search of the area. I had my 3 detectives go down with their 2 dogs. They independently searched the area one by one. They came to the conclusion that there was no indication from either of the canines of any remains in the area. But so what we basically had was maybe a half cockeyed confession, but with no bodies. So we didn't believe it was credible information, but it was definitely worrisome. And there was a lot of community concern about this. To have potentially 6 bodies buried in town would be a shocking, horrifying discovery. So it's something we wanted to get out there and kind of make sure it wasn't anything. I'd rather do something and go over the board with the search than not do enough and it be something.
So to get further insight into these kinds of investigations and maybe what's happening here, I want to bring on a very special guest for all of you true crime fans. You will know this person very well. Former FBI profiler, true crime docuseries host of the Killer Psyche show, Candice DeLong. Candice, so good to see you. Thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks a lot, Jesse. Happy to be here.
So I got to ask you, in your professional opinion, do you think any of these cases are connected? Do you think we have a serial killer amongst us?
Unlikely, and there's no evidence of it whatsoever. That may turn out to be the case. Some of them are connected, but there's no evidence now. Some of the bodies, but at least one of the bodies, was so decomposed when it was reported, they couldn't even tell not only the cause of death, whether it was a homicide, natural accident, they couldn't even tell what gender it was until they did more investigation. So I think the internet rumors are fun, but they're a little too early.
Hey, so I know you all might be true crime fans, but are you also in a business? If so, let me tell you about our sponsor, Odoo. Odoo is an incredible all-in-one business management software that provides you with a range of applications, like their sales tool, the Kanban pipeline, game changer. Whether you're working with leads or full-blown opportunities, you can visually track every stage of your sales process. You just drag and drop to move deals forward. It's fast and honestly kind of satisfying. When it's time to send a quote, it's literally a couple of clicks, and the reporting, super clear. You get a live view of your pipeline, conversions, what's working, so you can focus on closing and not guessing. Right now, you can get a free 15-day trial of Odoo's all-in-one business solution and see how it can make your life a little bit easier. Check it out at odoo.com/sidebarcrm. Unfortunately, in this country, there are homicides, there are deaths everywhere, all the time. Why do you think we are seeing in this geographical area, why the focus on this particular region, these particular deaths? Why do you think we're seeing this chatter about possible connections and a possible similarity and a possible pattern and a possible killer who's responsible or killers responsible for all this? Why do you think we're seeing that?
Well, the tri-state area, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, the population, I did some math, the population over 20 years old is about 10 million people in that tri-state area. And those combined states have about 300 homicides a year. Now that includes domestic violence, homicides committed in the home, premeditated spousal murder, school shootings, everything is in that 300 a year. What we're looking at here is potentially 9 homicides, and they're really not even sure they're all homicides. I haven't figured it out, but if you take another population in a particular geographic area of 10 million people over 20 years old, and I only say over 20 because all of the victims were over 20, it might be the very same thing. or not too much, not exactly the same, but not too much different. 300 murders per 10 million people annually of people over 20 years old. That I don't know the answer to. What I do know is that's what's happening in this tri-state area. And I don't know why this has caught the attention of the internet sleuths.
Thousands of people part of these groups thinking there could be something here. I mean, let's just play devil's advocate for a second. Let's just hypothetically. Sure. Let's say what would be certain signs you would be looking for to say, you know what, wait a minute, I think there might be a serial killer afoot. What would be some characteristics? What would be some things that you would be looking at and saying, wait a minute, I think we have to take a second look. These might be connected. We might have a serial killer in our midst.
Well, there's a few things that would make me sit up straight in my chair. And that would be were the bodies all determined to be homicide, and what was the cause of death? Was it blunt force trauma? Was it stabbing? Was it shooting? That kind of thing. Also, I would perk up if the what we call a dump site, if the bodies were all disposed of in a certain geographic area, smaller, tighter area. Now, there are some serial killers that travel a lot, and they kill all along the way. Maybe they're cross-country truckers or drifters. I do understand that, but for the most part with serial killers, that is not the case. Also, if there were any kind of connection whatsoever between the victims, for example, if all of the victims were sex workers who solicited clients in a particular part of town, and street walking sex workers are at very high risk to be victimized by a killer or a serial killer. And that has not been determined. But if those things were determined, then I would say, okay, we need to look at this. And by the way, Jesse, in any serial killer case, there may be bodies that were found that have nothing to do with the serial killer, but are initially lumped into the mix.
Like Gilgo? Like Gilgo?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that raises an interesting question, because some people online have pointed out that if there's not a serial killer, it's almost worse, because putting aside the cases where you might have an accident or the manner of death might be something else, it's almost worse because people are saying, then what are we dealing with? Multiple killers out there? And that actually made me think certain of these areas where remains are found could be situations where that might just be an advantageous area to dispose of a body. Unfortunately, I mean, we've seen that happen before. So you look at people online who say, this could actually be worse because you get multiple different unrelated crimes and killers. That's a concerning aspect too, right?
Well, like I said, for that particular tight geographic area, in that tri-state, 300 homicides a year.
Yeah.
We're talking about somewhere between 9 and 11. And one of the ones that have been lumped in has already been determined was a homicide. It was the suitcase outside or inside the cemetery. And it was determined that was a domestic violence homicide, and there's been an arrest. So take that one out of the mix. It never belonged in it anyway. It was the only body found in a suitcase. Some serial killers do not repeat the same murder behavior over and over and over as they kill. They may not stab all their victims or shoot them or tie them up or dispose of their body in the woods. They may do different things, but that is unusual because serial killers are living out a fantasy. They're what they do to another person is fantasy driven, based on a fantasy they've been having since they were a kid, early adolescent. And now as an adult, they're acting it out. And that is the reason why we see a repetition of the MO over and over and over again. The fantasy doesn't change. For example, one serial killer may prefer to go into a victim's home and kill them there. Others may prefer to lure the victim to go with them in their car. Various things. And then once they have them alone, they do what they do. But it's usually the same thing over and over. And there, so far, has not been a connection like that found with these bodies.
Because wouldn't it be that you have a killer who commits a crime, they see it works, they might not be caught immediately, they say, oh my gosh, you know, aside from what the proclivities are or their MO, if something works, I'm going to keep on doing it in the same manner, right?
You're applying logic and reasoning to something that's very hard to understand.
Fair.
That fantasy, yeah, of course, every time they get away with it, it emboldens them to do it again and to do it again in the same way. But whatever fantasy they've been nursing for, in some cases, more than a decade or two, is going to take precedent over everything else they do.
By the way, Candice, when does the FBI come in? When do they come in to help investigate these kinds of cases?
Well, homicide is a state, an offense of the state of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. So unless it happens on a murder happens on federal land, then it's immediately the FBI's. But the FBI has to be invited in by the law enforcement department working the case. Now, the behavioral science unit, or now I believe they call it something different, critical incident or behavioral analysis or something like that. They're always available for consultation on things like this, but they have to get a phone call. They don't just run in and take over the case.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And obviously they have different resources than local jurisdictions. By the way, if any of the viewers have watched police dramas or true crime documentaries, they've probably heard of something called, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing it, VICAP or VCAP. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing it. Mm-hmm. VICAP. Can you tell us a little bit more about these databases, why they're beneficial, what kind of information can be entered, searched, by who, things like that?
VICAP stands for Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and it was developed in the early 80s. It is the brainchild of a LAPD homicide detective. And what it is, homicide detectives, and it's not just homicide, but for this particular one, can use this database. They need to input information from their case. For example, body of a 15-year-old female was found in the woods, manual strangulation, no sexual assault, all the details. Was she found naked? Were her clothes there? Anything about it. And that information put in the computer. And the computer or the system, the platform, let's say there's a serial killer or the Rhode Island murder we're talking about, or the Rhode Island body. And it's the same killer that did something in Massachusetts or Connecticut. And those detectives feed all the information they have, minute details, into the VICAP system. The VICAP system is going to kick it out to the FBI and say, hey, we've got a series of similar types of behaviors that resulted in someone's murder or disposal site or something. And so then the FBI contacts all of those departments and says, hey, Connecticut, you need to talk to this detective over here in Rhode Island. He has an extremely similar case. Now, this was VICAP was developed before DNA became what it is today, DNA left at crime scenes. So now, of course, if there were DNA, there's another system, database system, CODIS, which is the DNA system. And I think it's been 40 years now since VICAP got started. So there's a lot of information in there. And it has, is my understanding, resulted in many multi-jurisdictional issues, murders, those detectives being all put in touch with each other and working the case to fruition.
I mean, that's great. And that's great. And that's why, circling back to this idea about connections and the public's help. Look, you are a profiler. You are somebody who studies human behavior. Just to circle back to this, when we're thinking about people trying to see if there is a serial killer or connections here, why do you think so many people will latch on to a theory like a crime spree, a serial killer? You mentioned before that it seems, I think the word you used was fun. Is it exciting? Talk to us about why we're seeing this. 65,000 people in a group thinking there could be a New England serial killer, or at least engaging in that conversation. Why do you think that is? And by the way, does it help or hurt an investigation?
It can hurt an investigation if people, okay, let's go back to the Moscow, Idaho murder of the 4 students a couple Novembers ago.
Yep.
There was a lot of online sleuthing, and it became a problem when they were identifying people that they thought were responsible.
Yep.
That can have disastrous consequences. It really can. I think the reasons that people do this are multifaceted. First, it is fun to be a part of a group trying to solve a problem. That's fun. Another thing is they get reinforcement from each other. They can share ideas. And I don't need to tell you, Jesse, how unbelievably popular true crime has become in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. It is the biggest single, I think, genre, a particular genre dominating television and podcasting. And I frequently get asked, people will come up and say, Candice, I'm fascinated by this stuff. Is there something wrong with me? To which my response is, no, there's something right with you. If someone was murdered in your community, or a little kid was snatched, or this is something human to human, and you're a human in that community, you need to know what's going on. And there's something to be learned from every single incident, every single homicide, to keep yourself safe. So I think that's all a part of it. And when I say there's something to be learned to keep yourself safe, let me give you an example. Regarding the case we're talking about of these bodies being found, a number of them were found in the woods. When I was an FBI agent in Chicago, of course, huge, huge city. And they have these things in Chicago. They're not called parks. They're called forest preserves. They're like a huge park. I used to ride my bike, 13 miles back and forth through one of them on a bike path. I lost count of the number of cases I had being brought to me by detectives in the greater Chicago area of women that were murdered in forest preserves. All right, now back to the case we're talking about. Some of these bodies were found in densely forested areas. Here's my safety tip. Ladies, especially ladies and teenage girls, do not walk in the forest or the woods by yourself. And I wouldn't even do it with a girlfriend. It's just not safe.
That is incredibly important advice. And unfortunately, I've seen exactly what you're saying, and I couldn't agree more. Candice DeLong, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Jesse, anytime.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.